Welcome to the Midnight Quilter, where the stitches are as cozy as Grandma's fruitcake. Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters, and I'm so glad you're joining me for a month of festive quilting fun with the Season's Greetings video series. In the previous videos, we already saw how to machine quilt the larger Season's Greetings panel and how to turn it into some fun quilted projects. This is the third video in the series where we're going to be machine quilting the Season's Greetings pillow panel I designed exclusively for this series. And if you've never tried free motion quilting, I hope you'll stick around because I'm going to show you just how fun it is. Not only will I share the free motion quilting basics, we'll also get a little help using stencils. Of course, any machine quilting stencil will work, but I designed this one exclusively for the series. Using stencils makes machine quilting designs so much easier without pulling your hair or needing a degree in holiday quilting magic. I'll also demonstrate how to quilt some holiday-inspired designs like holly leaves and snowflakes. These designs are not only easy to quilt, they're perfect for adding that holiday look to your quilting. I know what you're thinking, wow, Midnight Quilter, that looks so fancy. But I promise you, it's not difficult. So whether you're a brand new machine quilter or a seasoned pro, I'm gonna walk you through the steps of quilting this beautiful panel, making the quilting process fun and easy and sure to even impress Santa himself. So grab your sewing machine, your thread, and your piecing potion, because we're about to turn this simple panel into a quilted masterpiece. First up, we have to make the quilt sandwich. It's not the most glamorous or fun part of machine quilting, but it is a necessity. So I'm gonna take my backing fabric and lay it right side down, and then place my batting right on top of it. Then I'm gonna place the panel right on top of that, facing right side up. Then it's time to secure those layers together. You could use basting spray if you'd like. You could use safety pins. I'm actually using a fusible batting, so I'm just gonna take an iron real quick and iron over the top of it to fuse those layers together. However you go about it, just get those layers together so we can get to the fun part. For the first quilting option, we're gonna use some stencils to help make it a little bit easier to follow the path. The great thing about stencils is it takes some of the thinking out of the machine quilting process. Instead of worrying about where to go next, you can follow that line and focus more on moving your hands smoothly and breathing, which is always a great thing. So I'm gonna need my stencil and some marking tools. You can mark stencils with a Mark Begone pen or the Pounce pad, and I almost always use the Pounce pad. I just love it because it's a lot quicker to mark and it comes off so much easier. Marking out the stencil is as easy as placing it where I want to go. Once I'm happy with its placement, I'm gonna try not to move it, and I'm gonna grab my Pounce pad and then wipe the chalk over the stencil. Now sometimes I've heard quilters say my Pounce pad doesn't work. It will, you just have to hit it a couple times to kind of prime that chalk. And when I pull it up, I should have my beautifully marked lines. Now these little circles in the corners are my registration lines, and that's how I'm gonna reposition my stencil quickly and easily, because obviously it doesn't go to the edge of the quilt. Taking a moment to line that up. It's like snow in here. And then marking out those lines as well. Now the Pounce pad chalk does come off super easy, so I'm gonna mark my quilt right before I get ready to quilt. I don't want to mark it and let it sit around for a while. In fact, I don't ever even mark the whole quilt before I start. I'm just going to mark one section, quilt it, mark the next section, and continue on. So I'm going to set this aside for now, grab my sewing machine, and we're going to start quilting along those lines. All right, I hope you're excited because this is the fun part. So that you can see what I'm quilting on the camera, I'm going to use the gold thread on this fabric. But if you don't like that quilting all in your face, use the red or the green thread. In fact, I think it would look cool if you alternate between colors, but that is totally up to you. So I'm just going to position the quilt at the start point and begin quilting along that line. Now, one thing I want to point out is that using a stencil makes machine quilting easier. It doesn't make it perfect. So throw out those notions of perfection because we're not here for that. But what I am trying to do is keep the line smooth, and to help do that, I'm looking ahead of the needle in the direction that I'm heading. This is just like driving a car or like driving a sleigh. I don't look right at the hood, I look right on down the road. And you have to remember that even if your quilted line comes off that marked line a little bit, it's totally fine, because eventually we're gonna erase these marked lines and nobody's gonna know where it should have went. So try not to be too precise with this. Instead, look ahead and kind of get a nice momentum, a nice flow going, and I promise it'll look better. Now I'm quilting this ribbon candy so that I'm working in a vertical motion because I find that a little bit easier. But you have to play around with this and find what works for you. For instance, if you find that working horizontally is a little bit easier, just rotate your quilt so that you're quilting in that direction. I designed this stencil to have ribbon candy because I know it's a design that a lot of machine quilters struggle with, and I was definitely one of those when I started quilting. And of course, I could have designed just a straight, boring old ribbon candy, but I wanted this to look beautiful in the background or bigger borders of your quilts. So the ribbon candy and the swirls do have a little bit of movement to them. It's kind of funny. I think of stencils as kind of like the GPS for quilting. It shows you where to go, you just have to get there. And there I have my first row finished. And again, even though my quilting comes off the lines a little bit, it's okay because once those all get removed, it's gonna look great. Now it's time to move on to the next row. So I'm just gonna stitch along the edge to get to that point and resume quilting my swirls. This is actually the first time I've ever designed a stencil, and I had so much fun. I can't wait to make more of them. If you want to get your hands on this one, I do have them for sale on our online store, along with other stencils with different shapes and designs. The trick to picking out the right stencil for you is to choose a design that you want to quilt that you struggle with. For instance, when I started machine quilting, I could not quilt feathers. I mean, I tried and I struggled. I eventually bought a feather stencil and I would mark it out and I would quilt it, and I would mark it and then quilt it. So it was definitely a great teaching tool to help get me where I wanted to go with my machine quilting. Now the designs in this stencil are pretty straightforward, but if you happen to be using stencils with more complicated designs, sometimes you might get lost on knowing where to go. If that happens, just pause, take a moment, and use your finger to trace out the next couple of steps. After you've worked that stencil a couple times, you'll be able to do it with no problem. Now, of course, I designed the stencil, so I like how it looks, but if you don't want to do both the designs, the swirls and the ribbon candy, just mark out one of them. I could mark out a row of my ribbon candy, reposition that stencil, and continue doing that. That way it makes the stencil more versatile and perfect for you. So whether you just use the ribbon candy or the swirls or both, it's going to look great on your quilts. And check that out. I quilted the first 4 rows of the stencil. And since I like to mark it as I go, I'm going to go ahead and mark the next section right now. There are a lot of ways that you can use stencils with your quilting. As we've seen so far, I can use it as an all-over design, or I can quilt along it so that it looks like it's going behind something else, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to quilt along those stenciled lines, but once I run into the edge of that flower, I'm going to travel and move on to the next point. It's actually a lot easier than it sounds, and it's a really fun way to make parts of your quilt pop off while still using your stencil. So I'm going to start by quilting along that marked line as normal. But once my quilting hits the edge of that flower, I'm just going to travel along the edge to the next point where the line continues. And I'm going to do it again. Travel along the edge of that flower and quilt the other side. And I'm going to continue quilting my row using traveling to stay out of that flower. Quilting this technique really isn't difficult, but it is one more thing to think about. So if you're a brand new machine quilter and you just want to learn how to breathe and quilt along the stencil, stick with using it as an all-over. But the great thing about stencils and other machine quilting products is they can grow with you on your free motion journey. So you can use them in different, more complex ways to get cool effects for your quilt. And as I'm quilting, the edge of that flower is going to have sections that are stitched down and other sections that aren't. I'm not going to worry about that right now. Later on, when I quilt the center of that flower, I'm going to go ahead and stitch all of that down at that point. And this doesn't have to be perfectly precise to be effective. So if you happen to go over the flower a little bit, if you miss a small portion of the stenciled line, don't worry about it. Because once you step back and see the overall effect, you're not going to notice any of those little bits of imperfection. Right here is a perfect example of when I'm going to be less than precise. As I quilt around this swirl, it's going to end me up over here, and normally I would come back over here and fill in this area, but it's going to be too much trouble to get down there, so I'm just going to leave it. If that drives you crazy or you're too worried about it, you can always come back and grab it later when you're adding that stitching along the sides of the flower. So just know, doesn't have to be precise, just get it close and move on. And since I'm getting ready to run into the whole big flower over here, I'm actually going to tie off, move over there and continue on, moving to where it comes out of that flower right here. And like I said, I'm using this gold thread so you can see where I'm going. And so that means all my traveling along the edge is definitely going to show up. But once we put everything else around it, it's not going to stand out. At least that's what I'm telling myself right this moment. Well, now that I got a good chunk of that quilt done, let me show you what it looks like. I love how the stencil designs look awesome in the background, and of course how it looks like it goes behind that center flower. And like I've already shown, you can use that stencil in a bunch of different ways. For instance, if you like quilting things to death as much as I do, you might want a little bit more quilting in here. It's as easy as quilting those stencil lines and then coming back and filling in with a different design. I especially think it would look great if you used a different thread color in those areas. And of course, I could continue quilting that across my whole pillow panel, but I want to show you a different option for quilting that. For a different quilting option, we're going to use some holiday themed designs and some wavy lines to draw attention to that center flower. I'm going to quilt wavy lines so that they look like they're extending from that center. And on those lines, we're going to throw in some holly leaves and some little starbursts to look like snowflakes. So one thing that I find helpful is to kind of mark registration lines before I get started. The trick to this though is remembering that all my lines are going to aim towards the center of that panel. We don't need this to be precise, we just need a general guideline. And if you're a little bit worried about kind of getting off track, you can add even more guidelines by just picking any point on the edge and drawing a line towards the center. As I'm quilting my wavy lines, out towards the edge of the quilt, I'm going to have more space between them, and in towards the center, there's going to be less space. So I have to remember that as I'm quilting, I'm not actually echoing the previous line, it's kind of angling away. And since I might be drinking a little bit of my quilting juice, I might just add a couple extra lines just in case. Well, now that we have those registration lines marked, let's get to the quilting because you're going to see just how fun it is. Since I'm wanting to highlight that center flower, all my lines are going to run into the edge of that. So starting at one point, I'm going to begin quilting my wavy line, kind of using that reference line as a guide. This line doesn't have to be super wavy, but I don't really want it stick straight because I just want to have a little bit of movement to it. Then at a random point, I'm going to add a little bit of my holiday flair by quilting a holly leaf. And I'm going to do that by stopping and working my way back the direction I just came, quilting some arced lines that go out, and then come back to touch that quilted line. Something like this shape. What I love about quilting holly leaves is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Even if one side isn't the same as the other, it's totally fine. Now from that point, I'm going to do the same thing, quilting another arced line that comes out and then touches where I originally started. Now, if you're feeling festive, you can add a couple little circles to look like the berries of the holly, or you could just continue on. I mean, how adorable is that? See, this is why I love this season. Once I'm done with that, I can resume quilting my wavy line in the direction I'm heading. So I'm going to travel along the edge of the quilt and repeat that. Another cute little holiday design we can throw in there is a little starburst. Now the starburst can look like a lot of stuff, but on this particular quilt, I think it's going to look like a snowflake. So basically I'm quilting an X and a cross to create that little starburst. And as I'm quilting those wavy lines, I'm throwing in these random designs in places I think they'll look nice. When I'm adding more quilting in between my marked reference lines, what I'm trying to do is kind of split the difference. So if I'm looking at the midpoint between these 2 points and quilting a line that's the midpoint towards over here, so just kind of splitting the difference there. So if I want to go ahead and fill in this area, I'm going to travel along that flower until I'm roughly in between those 2 lines and resume quilting. And I ended up somewhere kind of towards the middle of those previous 2 lines. And to keep adding more quilting, I'm going to do the same thing. But as I'm filling in the area, I'm going to find I get to spaces that I can't keep going. So once I run out of room, I'm just going to change direction and come right back. So it's almost like I'm quilting a really long V to fill in that area. And if I find myself running into a previously quilted line, I can use traveling to move around it, or just kind of skirt around it with my quilting. So again, I ran out of room, so I'm just going to hop back the other direction and work my way to the edge. And remember, you can add as many or as few of those little details as you want. I personally like to quilt them in areas where you can actually see them. So in the busier fabrics, I'm just gonna do the wavy line, but out in the background area where you can kind of see it, that's where I'll throw in those little bits of holly and snowflakes. The great thing is, depending on how much room you have available, you can easily change up the size of these. You can make them smaller or bigger, just depending on the space you have available. And if you find yourself stuck in the center with nowhere to go, just use traveling along the edge to move over and get to the next area. And remember, I'm using this gold thread so you can really see the quilting on camera, but you can always use the red or green thread if you want to blend in a little bit more. And I'm just going to repeat doing that, quilting my wavy lines, adding those little details, filling in those wedges that I've marked out until the whole area is filled in. If I find I have any large gaps in between my wavy lines as I'm quilting, I'm just going to add some more stuff in there, whether it's another wavy line, whether it's throwing in a holly leaf. As long as everything is filled in as completely as possible, it's going to look great. This is so much more fun than wrapping presents. So I'm going to keep quilting, filling it in, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all finished. And when you're done, you'll have a quilting design that adds beautiful movement and texture to your quilt. To give your quilting a slightly different look, try quilting some of the wavy lines in different thread colors. If the idea of quilting those wavy lines so that they extend from the center of the quilt seem a little too daunting, we can try a different option by quilting our wavy lines in rows. Then we can add in some holly leaves and berries and some snowflakes as we'd like. I'm going to start from one edge of my area and quilt a wavy line towards the opposite side. And this line can be as wavy or as gentle as you like. There is literally no wrong way to do this. And then when you're ready to throw in a little bit of that holiday cheer, you can stop and begin quilting your holly leaf. Promise me that you won't overthink this. I just need a shape that's pointier at the ends with a couple little arcs on the sides. And if you want, you can add a little vein inside of that leaf, just to give it a little detail. And then you can continue on with your wavy line. But if one holly leaf is great, why not add some more? Instead of quilting one, you can quilt them in clusters of 2 or even 3, and then throw in some circles for those little berries that go with it. I mean, how cute is that? And I'm just going to continue doing that, quilting those wavy lines and then throwing in some holly leaves and berries randomly throughout. Once I reach the edge of my area, I'm going to travel over a couple inches and then work my way back doing the same thing. But I'm going to use the first quilted row as a guide, throwing in those holly leaves and berries in between the previously quilted ones. I can quilt them so they're on the same side of that wavy line or so that they go on either side of it. I mean, truly, there's no right or wrong way to do this. This is one of those designs that aren't going to work on every quilt all the time. But every once in a while, when you come across that holiday quilt, it's a perfect way to add that pointy, leafy look while adding a little bit of holiday cheer as well. And then once I get to the edge of my row, I'm going to do the same thing, traveling along the edge of the quilt and quilting that next row of wavy lines with those holly leaves. Maybe your holly leaves are smaller than mine, or maybe they're bigger and wider. It really doesn't matter. I mean, you can make them all the same size, or you can change up the sizes as you go. The most important thing is that you have fun with it. And we can also throw in those little snowflakes like we already saw earlier, by quilting our lines that go out and back to the center in all different directions, and then continue on in the way we were heading. And you can always change this up to fit your preferences. If you don't like the idea of them hanging out willy-nilly, you can quilt them so that they're connected to that wavy line, just like we saw earlier. And for an even more holly-rific look, holly-tastic? For an even more holly look, I can add more of them on that line. In fact, I could even quilt them so that they're touching each other. No matter how you quilt it, it's going to add some Christmas cheer to your quilt and look amazing. And when you're done, you'll have a beautiful, wavy, holiday-themed design that's going to look great on your pillow panel. When it comes to quilting the center point setup of your panel, you have a couple different options. You can quilt your designs so they go right over the top of that flower. Or if you want to add a little bit more of a custom touch, you can try adding some echoing inside those bigger petals. Very similar to what we saw in the very first video of the series. Then just quilt right along the details in the leaves. It's an easy way to let that flower kind of pop off from the rest of the quilting. Then in the smaller leaves, you can either add some echo lines or quilt some of these pointed shapes like I've done here. I kind of quilted this particular panel to death, because what can I say? I love a lot of quilting. When quilting the center poinsettia, try quilting some feathers or other motifs within those petals. Then in the smaller leaves, you can add some echoing and some dense filler like these pebbles to really make the designs pop out. And of course, because I am a little extra, I went ahead and quilted it all with gold thread so you could really see the quilting. But then in the background, I went crazy. Not only did I switch up the thread colors, I quilted some larger elements in the background as well. I started by pulling out some of the details in the panel and quilting them in the background. I quilted those in contrasting threads so they would really stand out from the filler. Then I filled in that area with the red thread. I just love how it gives it a little bit of a color while letting those gold elements pop. And then towards the edges of the panel, I switched thread colors yet again by quilting those bigger elements in the red thread and filling around that area with the green thread. But what I love about quilting is that you can do whatever you like. This is like a choose your own quilting adventure. So whether you want to quilt your panel with the ribbon candy or go all out and switch up thread colors, either way it's going to look fantastic. Honestly, I could just hang this on a wall and call it art. But I've got some bigger plans in store for this panel, because in the next video, I'm going to show you how we can turn this panel into some quilted projects. In the meantime, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight in the Midnight Quilters Workshop. Like I said, I'll be back soon with another video in the series. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.